Book 5, Part 1. Now morn her rosy steps the eastern clime advancing, sowed the earth with orient pearl. When Adam waked, so customed, for his sleep was airy light, from pure digestion bred and temperate vapours bland, which the only sound of leaves and fuming rills, Aurora's fan lightly dispersed, and the shrill matin song of birds on every bough. So much the more his wonder was to find unwakened Eve with tresses discomposed and glowing cheek, as through unquiet rest. He on his side leaning half raised, with looks of cordial love hung over her enamoured, and beheld beauty, which whether waking or asleep shot forth peculiar graces. Then with voice mild as when Zephyrus on Flora breathes, her hand soft touching, whispered thus: "Awake, my fairest, my espoused, my latest found, heaven's last best gift, my ever new delight. Awake, the morning shines, and the fresh field calls us. We lose the prime to mark how spring our tinted plants, how blows the citron grove, what drops the myrrh and what the balmy reed, how nature paints her colours, how the bee sits on the bloom extracting liquid sweet." Such whispering waked her, but with startled eye on Adam, whom embracing, thus she spake: "Soul, in whom my thoughts find all repose, my glory, my perfection, glad I see thy face and morn returned, for I this night, such night till this I never passed, have dreamed, if dreamed, not as I oft am wont of thee, works of day past, or morrow's next design, but of offence and trouble, which my mind knew never till this irksome night. Methought close at mine ear one called me forth to walk with gentle voice. I thought it thine. It said, 'Why sleep'st thou, Eve? Now is the pleasant time, the cool, the silent, save where silence yields to the night-warbling bird, that now awake tunes sweetest his love-laboured song. Now reigns full-orbed the moon, and with more pleasing light shadowy sets off the face of things, in vain if none regard. Heaven wakes with all his eyes, whom to behold but thee, nature's desire, in whose sight all things joy, with ravishment attracted by thy beauty still to gaze. I rose as at thy call, but found thee not. To find thee I directed then my walk, and on methought alone I passed through ways that brought me on a sudden to the tree of interdicted knowledge. Fair it seemed, much fairer to my fancy than by day, and as I wondering looked, beside it stood one shaped and winged like one of those from heaven by us oft seen. His dewy locks distilled ambrosia. On that tree he also gazed, and "O fair plant," said he, "with fruits surcharged, deigns none to ease thy load and taste thy sweet, nor god nor man? Is knowledge so despised? Or envy, or what reserve forbids to taste, forbid who will, none shall from me withhold longer thy offered good. Why else set here?" Thus said he paused not, but with venturous arm he plucked, he tasted. Me damp horror chilled at such bold words, vouched with a deed so bold, but he thus overjoyed: "O fruit divine, sweet of thyself, but much more sweet, thus cropped, forbidden here, it seems as only fit for gods, yet able to make gods of men. And why not gods of men, since good, the more communicated, more abundant grows, the author not impaired, but honoured more? Here, happy creature, fair angelic Eve, partake thou also. Happy though thou art, happier thou mayst be. Worthier canst not be. Taste this, and be henceforth among the gods, thyself a goddess, not to earth confined, but sometimes in the air, as we sometimes ascend to heaven, by merit thine, and see what life the gods live there, and such live thou." So saying, he drew nigh, and to me held, even to my mouth, of that same fruit held part which he had plucked. The pleasant savoury smell so quickened appetite, that I methought could not but taste. Forthwith up to the clouds with him I flew, and underneath beheld the earth outstretched immense, a prospect wide and various, wondering at my flight, and changed to this high exaltation. Suddenly my guide was gone, and I methought sunk down and fell asleep. Oh, how glad I waked to find this but a dream! Thus Eve her night related, and thus Adam answered sad. Best image of myself, and dearer half, the trouble of thy thoughts this night in sleep affects me equally. Nor can I like this uncouth dream of evil sprung, I fear. Yet evil wince. In thee can harbour none created pure. But know that in the soul are many lesser faculties that serve reason as chief. Among these, fancy next her office holds, of all external things, which the 5 watchful senses represent. She forms imaginations, airy shapes, which reason joining or disjoining frames all what we affirm or what deny, and calls our knowledge or opinion, then retires into her private cell when nature rests. Oft in her absence mimic fancy wakes to imitate her, but misjoining shapes wild work produces oft, and most in dreams, ill-matching words and deeds long past or late. Some such resemblances methinks I find of our last evening's talk, in this thy dream, but with addition strange. Yet be not sad. Evil into the mind of God or man may come and go, so unapproved, and leave no spot or blame behind, which gives me hope that what in sleep thou didst abhor to dream, waking thou never wilt consent to do. Be not disheartened, then, nor cloud those looks that want to be more cheerful and serene than when fair morning first smiles on the world, and let us to our fresh employments rise among the groves, the fountains, and the flowers, that open now their choicest bosomed smells reserved from night, and kept for thee in store. So cheered he his fair spouse, and she was cheered, but silently a gentle tear let fall from either eye, and wiped them with her hair. 2 other precious drops that ready stood, each in their crystal sluice, he, ere they fell, kissed, as the gracious signs of sweet remorse and pious awe, that feared to have offended. So all was cleared, and to the field they haste, but first from under shady arbor's roof, soon as they forth were come to open sight of dayspring, and the sun, who scarce uprisen, with wheels yet hovering o'er the ocean brim, shot parallel to the earth his dewy ray, discovering in wide landscape all the east of paradise and Eden's happy plains. Lowly they bowed adoring, and began their orisons, each morning duly paid in various style, for neither various style nor holy rapture wanted they to praise their Maker. In fit strains pronounced, or sung unmeditated, such prompt eloquence flowed from their lips, in prose or numerous verse, more tunable than needed lute or harp to add more sweetness. And they thus began. These are thy glorious works, Parent of good, Almighty. Thine this universal frame, thus wondrous fair. Thyself, how wondrous then, unspeakable, who sitt'st above these heavens, to us invisible or dimly seen in these thy lowest works. Yet these declare thy goodness beyond thought and power divine. Speak ye who best can tell, ye sons of light, angels, for ye behold him, and with songs and choral symphonies, day without night, circle his throne rejoicing. Ye in heaven, on earth join all ye creatures to extol him first, him last, him midst and without end, fairest of stars, last in the train of night, if better thou belong not to the dawn, sure pledge of day, that crown'st the smiling morn with thy bright circlet. Praise him in thy sphere while day arises, that sweet hour of prime. Thou sun, of this great world, both eye and soul acknowledge him thy greater, sound his praise in thy eternal course, both when thou climb'st, and when high noon hast gained, and when thou fall'st. Moon, that now meet'st the orient sun, now fliest with the fixed stars, fixed in their orb that flies, and ye 5 other wandering fires, that move in mystic dance, not without song, resound his praise, who out of darkness called up light. Air, and ye elements, the eldest birth of nature's womb, that in quaternion run perpetual circle, multiform, and mix and nourish all things. Let your ceaseless change vary to our great Maker's still new praise. Ye mists and exhalations that now rise from hill or streaming lake, dusky or grey, till the sun paints your fleecy skirts with gold in honor to the world's great author, rise. Whether to deck with clouds the uncolored sky, or wet the thirsty earth with falling showers, rising or falling, still advance his praise ye winds, that from four quarters blow, breathe soft or loud, and wave your tops, ye pines with every plant and sign of worship. Wave, fountains, and ye that warble as ye flow, melodious murmurs, warbling tune his praise. Join voices, all ye living souls, ye birds that singing up to heaven gate ascend. Bear on your wings and in your notes his praise. Ye that in waters glide, and ye that walk the earth in stately tread, or lowly creep. Witness if I be silent, morn or even, to hill or valley, fountain or fresh shade, made vocal by my song, and taught his praise. Hail, universal Lord! Be bounteous still to give us only good, and if the night have gathered aught of evil or concealed, disperse it, as now light dispels the dark. So prayed they innocent, and to their thoughts firm peace recovered soon and wonted calm. On to their morning's rural work they haste among sweet dews and flowers, where any row of fruit trees over woody reached too far their pampered boughs, and needed hands to check fruitless embraces. Or they led the vine to wed her elm, she spoused about him twines her marriageable arms, and with her brings her dower, the adopted clusters, to adorn his barren leaves. Them thus employed, beheld with pity heaven's high king, and to him called Raphael, the sociable spirit, that deigned to travel with Tobias, and secured his marriage with the 7 times wedded maid. Raphael, said he, thou hearest what stir on earth Satan, from hell escaped through the darksome gulf, hath raised in paradise, and how disturbed this night the human pair, how he designs in them at once to ruin all mankind. Go, therefore, half this day as friend with friend converse with Adam, in what bower or shade thou find'st him from the heat of noon retired, to respite his day labour with repast or with repose. And such discourse bring on as may advise him of his happy state, happiness in his power left free to will, left to his own free will, his will, though free yet mutable. Whence warn him to beware he swerve not too secure. Tell him withal his danger, and from whom, what enemy late fallen himself from heaven is plotting now the fall of others from like state of bliss. By violence, no, for that shall be withstood, but by deceit and lies, this let him know, least wilfully transgressing, he pretends surprisal, unadmonished, unforewarned. So spake the Eternal Father, and fulfilled all justice, nor delayed the winged saint after his charge received, but from among 1,000 celestial ardours where he stood, veiled with his gorgeous wings, upspringing light flew through the midst of heaven. Angelic choirs on each hand parting, to his speed gave way through all the imperial road, till at the gate of heaven arrived, the gate self-opened wide on golden hinges turning, as by work divine the sovereign architect had framed. From hence, no cloud or to obstruct his sight star interposed, however small he sees, not unconformed to other shining globes, earth and the garden of God, with cedars crowned above all hills. As when by night the glass of Galileo, less assured, observes imagined lands and relics in the moon, or Pilate from amidst the Cyclades, Delos or Samos, first appearing, kens a cloudy spot. Down thither prone in flight he speeds, and through the vast ethereal sky sails between worlds and worlds, with steady wing now on the polar winds, then with quick fan winnows the buxom air, till within soar of towering eagles, to all the fowls he seems a phoenix, gazed by all as that sole bird when to enshrine his relics in the sun's bright temple, to Egyptian Thebes he flies. At once on the eastern cliff of paradise he lights, and to his proper shape returns, a seraph winged. 6 wings he wore, to shade his lineaments divine, The pair that clad each shoulder broad came mantling o'er his breast with regal ornament, the middle pair girt like a starry zone his waist, and round skirted his loins and thighs with downy gold and colours dipped in heaven. The third his feet shadowed from either heel with feathered mail, sky-tinctured grain. Like Maia's son he stood and shook his plumes, that heavenly fragrance filled the circuit wide. Straight knew him all the bands of angels under watch, and to his state and to his message high in honour rise, for on some message high they guessed him bound. Their glittering tents he passed, and now is come into the blissful field, through groves of myrrh and flowering odours, cassia, nard, and balm, a wilderness of sweets, for nature here wantoned as in her prime, and played at will her virgin fancies, pouring forth more sweet, wild above rule or art, enormous bliss. Him through the spicy forest onward come Adam discerned, as in the door he sat of his cool bower, while now the mounted sun shot down direct his fervid rays to warm earth's inmost womb, more warmth than Adam need, and Eve within, due at her hour, prepared for dinner savoury fruits, of taste to please true appetite, and not disrelish thirst, of nectarous draughts between, from milky stream, berry, or grape, to whom thus Adam called, "Haste hither, Eve, and worth thy sight, behold eastward among those trees, what glorious shape comes this way moving? Seems another morn risen on mid-noon. Some great behest from heaven to us perhaps he brings, and will vouchsafe this day to be our guest. But go with speed, and what thy stores contain bring forth and pour abundance, fit to honour and receive our heavenly stranger. Well we may afford our givers their own gifts, and large bestow from large bestowed, where nature multiplies her fertile growth, and by disburdening grows more fruitful, which instructs us not to spare. To whom thus Eve, Adam, earth's hallowed mould, of God inspired, small store will serve, where store all seasons, ripe for use, hangs on the stalk, save what by frugal storing firmness gains to nourish, and superfluous moist consumes. But I will haste, and from each bough and brake, each plant and juiciest gourd, pluck such choice to entertain our angel guest, as he beholding shall confess that here on earth God hath dispensed his bounties as in heaven." So saying, with dispatchful looks in haste she turns, on hospitable thoughts intent. What choice to choose for delicacy best? What order so contrived as not to mix tastes not well joined, inelegant, but bring taste after taste, upheld with kindliest change, bestirs her then, and from each tender stalk whatever earth all-bearing mother yields, in India east or west, or middle shore in Pontus or the Punic coast, or where Alcinous reigned, fruit of all kinds, in coat rough or smooth rind, or bearded husk, or shell she gathers, tribute large, and on the board heaps with unsparing hand. For drink the grape she crushes, inoffensive most, and meaths from many a berry, and from sweet kernels, pressed she tempers dulcet creams, nor these to hold wants her fit vessels pure, then strews the ground with rose and odours from the shrub unfumed. Meanwhile our primitive great-sire, to meet his godlike guest, walks forth, without more train accompanied than with his own complete perfections. In himself was all his state, more solemn than the tedious pomp that waits on princes, when their rich retinue long of horses led, and grooms, besmeared with gold, dazzles the crowd, and sets them all agape. Nearer his presence Adam, though not awed, yet with submiss approach, and reverence meek, as to a superior nature, bowing low, thus said, "Native of heaven, for other place none can, than heaven, such glorious shape contain, since by descending from the thrones above, those happy places thou hast deigned a while to want, and honour these, vouchsafe with us, two only, who yet by sovereign gift possess this spacious ground, in yonder shady bower to rest, and what the garden choicest bears to sit and taste, till this meridian heat be over, and the sun more cool decline." Whom thus the angelic virtue answered mild, "Adam, I therefore came, nor art thou such created or such place hast here to dwell as may not oft invite, though spirits of heaven, to visit thee. Lead on then where thy bower o'ershades, for these mid-hours, till evening rise, I have it well. So to the sylvan lodge they came, that like Pomona's arbor smiled with florets decked and fragrant smells. But Eve, undecked, save with herself more lovely fair than wood nymph, or the fairest goddess feigned of three, that in Mount Ida naked strove, stood to entertain her guest from heaven. No veil she needed, virtue proof, no thought infirm altered her cheek, on whom the angel hail bestowed, the holy salutation used long after to blessed Mary, second Eve. Hail, mother of mankind, whose fruitful womb shall fill the world more numerous with thy sons, than with these various fruits the trees of God have heaped this table. Raised of grassy turf their table was, and mossy seats had round, and on her ample square from side to side, all autumn piled, though spring and autumn here danced hand in hand. A wild discourse they hold, no fear lest dinner cool, when thus began our author. Heavenly stranger, please to taste these bounties which our nourisher, from whom all perfect good unmeasured out descends to us for food and for delight, hath caused the earth to yield. Unsavory food perhaps to spiritual natures, only this I know, that one celestial Father gives to all. End of Book 5, Part 1.
Book 5, Part 2. To whom the angel. Therefore what he gives, whose praise be ever sung, to man in part spiritual, may of purest spirits be found no ingrateful food, and food alike those pure intelligential substances require, as doth your rational, and both contain within them every lower faculty of sense, whereby they hear, see, smell, touch, taste, tasting, concoct, digest, assimilate, and corporeal to incorporeal turn. For know, whatever was created needs to be sustained and fed. Of elements the grosser feeds the purer, earth the sea, earth and the sea feed air, the air those fires ethereal, and as lowest first the moon, whence in her visage round those spots unpurged vapours not yet into her substance turned. Nor doth the moon no nourishment exhale from her moist continent to higher orbs. The sun, that light imparts to all, receives from all his elemental recompense in humid exhalations, and at even sups with the ocean. Though in heaven the trees of life ambrosial fruitage bear, and vines yielded nectar, though from off the boughs each morn we brush mellifluous dews, and find the ground covered with pearly grain, yet God hath here varied his bounty so with new delights, as may compare with heaven, and to taste think not I shall be nice. So down they sat, and to their viands fell, nor seemingly the angel, nor in mist the common gloss of theologians, but with keen dispatch of real hunger, and concoctive heat to transubstantiate. What redounds, transpires through spirits with ease. Nor wonder, if by fire of sooty coal the empiric alchemist can turn, or holds it possible to turn, metals of drossiest ore to perfect gold as from the mine. Meanwhile, at table Eve ministered naked, and their flowing cups with pleasant liquors crowned. O innocence deserving paradise! If ever then had the sons of God excuse to have been enamoured at that sight. But in those hearts love unlibidinous reigned, nor jealousy was understood, the injured lover's hell. Thus, when with meats and drinks they had sufficed, not burdened nature, sudden mind arose in Adam, not to let the occasion pass given him by this great conference, to know of things above his world, and of their being who dwell in heaven, whose excellence he saw transcend his own so far, whose radiant forms divine effulgence, whose high power so far exceeded human, and his wary speech thus to the imperial minister he framed. Inhabitant with God, now know I well thy favour in this honour done to man, under whose lowly roof thou hast vouchsafed to enter, and these earthly fruits to taste, food not of angels, yet accepted so, as that more willingly thou couldst not seem at heaven's feast to have fed, yet what compare? To whom the winged hierarch replied, O Adam, one Almighty is, from whom all things proceed, and up to him return, if not depraved from good, created all such to perfection, One first matter all, endued with various forms, various degrees of substance, and in things that live of life; but more refined, more spirituous and pure, as near to him placed or near tending, each in their several active spheres assigned, till body up to spirit work, in bounds proportioned to each kind. So from the root springs lighter the green stalk, from thence the leaves more airy, last the bright consummate flower spirit's odorous breathes. Flowers and their fruit, man's nourishment, by gradual scale sublime to vital spirits aspire, to animal, to intellectual, give both life and sense, fancy and understanding, whence the soul reason receives, and reason is her being, discursive or intuitive. Discourse is oftenest yours, the latter most is ours, differing but in degree, of kind the same. Wonder not then what God for you saw good, if I refuse not, but convert as you to proper substance. Time may come when men with angels may participate, and find no inconvenient diet, nor too light fare. And from these corporeal nutriments perhaps your bodies may at last turn all to spirit, improved by tract of time, and winged ascend ethereal as we, or may at choice here or in heavenly paradises dwell, if ye be found obedient, and retain unalterably firm his love entire, whose progeny you are. Meanwhile enjoy your fill, what happiness this happy state can comprehend, incapable of more. To whom the Patriarch of mankind replied, O favourable Spirit, propitious guest, well hast thou taught the way that might direct our knowledge, and the scale of nature set from centre to circumference, whereon in contemplation of created things by steps we may ascend to God. But say, what meant that caution joined, if ye be found obedient? Can we want obedience then to him, or possibly his love desert, who formed us from the dust, and placed us here full to the utmost measure of what bliss human desires can seek or apprehend? To whom the angel, Son of heaven and earth, attend. That thou art happy, owe to God. That thou continuest such, owe to thyself, that is, to thy obedience. Therein stand. This was that caution given thee. Be advised. God made thee perfect, not immutable, and good he made thee, but to persevere he left it in thy power, ordained by thy will, by nature free, not o'erruled by fate inextricable or strict necessity. Our voluntary service he requires, not our necessitated. Such with him finds no acceptance, nor can find. For how can hearts not free be tried, whether they serve willing or no, who will but what they must by destiny, and can no other choose? Myself, and all the angelic host that stand in sight of God enthroned, our happy state hold as you yours, while our obedience holds. On other surety none. Freely we serve, because we freely love, as in our will to love or not. In this we stand or fall. And some are fallen, to disobedience fallen, and so from heaven to deepest hell. O fall from what high state of bliss into what woe! To whom our great progenitor, Thy words attentive, and with more delighted ear, divine instructor, I have heard, than when cherubic songs by night from the neighbouring hills aerial music send. Nor knew I not to be both will and deed created free. Yet that we shall never forget to love our Maker, and obey him whose command single is yet so just, my constant thoughts assured me, and still assure. Though what thou tellest hath passed in heaven, some doubt within me move, but more desire to hear, if thou consent, the full relation, which must needs be strange, worthy of sacred silence to be heard. And we have yet large day, for scarce the sun hath finished half his journey, and scarce begins his other half in the great zone of heaven. Thus Adam made request, and Raphael, after short pause assenting, thus began. High matter thou enjoin'st me, O prime of men, sad task and hard, for how shall I relate to human sense the invisible exploits of warring spirits? How without remorse the ruin of so many glorious once and perfect while they stood, how last unfold the secrets of another world, perhaps not lawful to reveal? Yet for thy good this is dispensed, and what surmounts the reach of human sense I shall delineate so, by likening spiritual to corporeal forms, and may express them best, though what if earth be but the shadow of heaven, and things therein each to other like, more than on earth is thought. As yet this world was not, and chaos wild reigned where these heavens now roll, where earth now rests, upon her centre poised, when on a day (for time, though in eternity, applied to motion, measures all things durable, by present, past, and future), on such day, as heaven's great year bring forth the imperial host of angels by imperial summons called, innumerable before the Almighty's throne, forthwith from all the ends of heaven appeared, under their hierarchs in orders bright, 10,000,000 ensigns high advanced, standards and gonfalons 'twixt van and rear, stream in the air, and for distinction served of hierarchies, of orders and degrees, or in their glittering tissues bear emblazoned holy memorials, acts of zeal and love recorded eminent. Thus when in orbs of circuit inexpressible they stood, orb within orb, the Father infinite, by whom in bliss embosomed sat the Son, amidst from a flaming mount whose top brightness had made invisible, thus spake: Hear, all ye angels, progeny of light, thrones, dominations, princedoms, virtues, powers, hear my decree, which unrevoked shall stand. This day I have begot whom I declare my only Son, and on this holy hill him have anointed, whom ye now behold at my right hand. Your head I him appoint, and by myself have sworn to him shall bow all knees in heaven, and shall confess him Lord. Under his great vice-regent reign abide, united as one individual soul, for ever happy. Him who disobeys me disobeys, breaks union, and that day cast out from God and blessed vision, falls into utter darkness, deep engulfed, his place ordained without redemption, without end. So spake the Omnipotent, and with his words all seemed well pleased, all seemed, but were not all. That day, as other solemn days, they spent in song and dance about the sacred hill, mystical dance, which yonder starry sphere of planets, and of fixed in all her wheels, resembles nearest, mazes intricate, eccentric, interrevolved, yet regular, then most when most irregular they seem. And in their motions harmony divine so smooths her charming tones, that God's own ear listens delighted. Evening approached, for we have also our evening and our morn, we ours for change delectable, not need. Forthwith from dance to sweet repast they turn, desirous all in circles as they stood. Tables are set, and on a sudden piled with angels' food, and rubied nectar flows. In pearl, in diamond, and massy gold, fruit of delicious vines, the growth of heaven. They eat, they drink, and with perfection sweet are filled before the all-bounteous King, who showered with copious hand, rejoicing in their joy. Now, when ambrosial night with clouds exhaled from that high mount of God, whence light and shade spring both, the face of brightest heaven had changed to grateful twilight, for night comes not near in darker veil, and roseate dews disposed, all but the unsleeping eyes of God to rest, wide over all the plain, and wider far than all this globious earth in plain outspread, such are the courts of God. The angelic throng dispersed in bands and files their camp extend, by living streams among the trees of life, pavilions numberless and sudden reared, celestial tabernacles where they slept, fanned with cool winds, save those who in their course melodious hymns about the sovereign throne alternate all night long. But not so waked Satan, so call him now, his former name is heard no more in heaven. He of the first, if not the first, archangel, great in power, in favour and preeminence, yet fraught with envy against the Son of God, that day honoured by his great Father, and proclaimed Messiah, King anointed, could not bear through pride that sight, and thought himself impaired. Deep malice thence conceiving and disdain, soon as midnight brought on the dusky hour friendliest to sleep and silence, he resolved with all his legions to dislodge, and leave unworshipped, unobeyed the throne supreme, contemptuous, and his next subordinate awakening, thus to him in secret spake: Sleepest thou, companion dear? What sleep can close thy eyelids? And rememberest what decree of yesterday so late hath passed the lips of heaven's Almighty? Thou to me thy thoughts wast wont, I mine to thee was wont to impart. Both waking we were one. How then can now thy sleep dissent? New laws thou seest imposed, new laws from him who reigns, new minds may raise in us who serve, new counsels, to debate what doubtful may ensue, more in this place to utter is not safe. Assemble thou of all those myriads which we lead the chief, tell them that by command, ere yet dim night her shadowy cloud withdraws, I am to haste, and all who under me their banners wave, homeward with flying march where we possess the quarters of the north, there to prepare fit entertainment to receive our King, the great Messiah, and his new commands, who speedily through all the hierarchies intends to pass triumphant and give laws. So spake the false archangel, and infused bad influence into the unwary breast of his associate. He together calls, or several, one by one, the regent powers, under him regent, tells, as he was taught, that the Most High commanding, now ere night, now ere dim night had disencumbered heaven, the great hierarchical standard was to move, tells the suggested cause, and casts between ambiguous words and jealousies to sound or taint integrity. But all obeyed the wonted signal and superior voice of their great potentate. For great indeed his name, and high was his degree in heaven. His countenance, as the morning star that guides the starry flock, allured them, and with lies drew after him the third part of heaven's host. Meanwhile the eternal eye, whose sight discerns abstrusest thoughts, from forth his holy mount, and from within the golden lamps that burn nightly before him, saw without the light rebellion rising, saw in whom, how spread among the sons of morn, what multitudes were banded to oppose his high decree, and smiling to his only Son, thus said, Son, thou in whom my glory I behold in full resplendence, heir of all my might, nearly it now concerns us to be sure of our omnipotence, and with what arms we mean to hold what anciently we claim of deity or emperor. Such a foe is rising who intends to erect his throne equal to ours throughout the spacious north. Nor so content hath in his thought to try in battle what our power is, or our right. Let us advise, and to this hazard draw with speed what force is left, and all employ in our defence, lest unawares we lose this our high place, our sanctuary, our hill. To whom the Son, with calm aspect and clear lightning divine, ineffable, serene, made answer, Mighty Father, thou thy foes justly hast in derision, and secure laughest at their vain designs and tumults vain, matter to me of glory, whom their hate illustrates, when they shall see all regal power given me to quell their pride, and event know whether I be dexterous to subdue thy rebels, or be found the worst in heaven. So spake the Son. But Satan with his powers far was advanced on winged speed, and host innumerable as the stars of night, or stars of morning, dewdrops which the sun imperils with every leaf and every flower. Regions they passed, the mighty regencies of seraphim and potentates and thrones, in their triple degrees, regions to which all thy dominion, Adam, is no more than what this garden is to all the earth and all the sea, from one entire globos stretched into longitude, which having passed at length into the limits of the north, they came, and Satan to his royal seat, high on a hill, far blazing, as a mount raised on a mount, with pyramids and towers, from diamond quarries hewn, and rocks of gold, the palace of great Lucifer, so call that structure in the dialect of men interpreted, which not long after he, affecting all equality with God, in imitation of that mount whereon Messiah was declared in sight of heaven, the mountain of the congregation called. For thither he assembled all his train, pretending so commanded to consult about the great reception of their King, thither to come, and with calumnious art of counterfeited truth thus held their ears. Thrones, dominations, princedoms, virtues, powers, if these magnific titles yet remain not merely titular, since by decree another now hath to himself engrossed all power, and us eclipsed under the name of King anointed, for whom all this haste of midnight march and hurried meeting here, this only to consult how we may best, with what may be devised of honours new, receive him, coming to receive from us knee tribute yet unpaid, prostration vile, too much to one, but double how endured to one and to his image now proclaimed. But what if better counsels might erect our minds to teach us to cast off this yoke? Will ye submit your necks, and choose to bend your supple knee? Ye will not, if I trust to know ye right, or if ye know yourselves, natives and sons of heaven, possessed before by none, and if not equal all, yet free, equally free. For orders and degrees jar not with liberty, but well consist. Who can in reason then, or right, assume monarchy over such as live by right his equals, if in power and splendour less, in freedom equal? Or can introduce law and edict upon us, who without law err not, much less for this to be our Lord, and look for adoration to the abuse of those imperial titles which assert our being ordained to govern, not to serve? Thus far his bold discourse without control had audience, when among the seraphim Abdiel, then whom none with more zeal adored the deity, and divine commands obeyed, stood up, and in a flame of zeal severe, the current of his fury thus opposed. O argument blasphemous, false, and proud, word which no ear ever to hear in heaven expected, least of all from thee, ingrate, in place thyself so high above thy peers! Canst thou with impious obloquy condemn the just decree of God, pronounced and sworn, that to his only Son, by right endued with regal sceptre, every soul in heaven shall bend the knee, and in that honour do confess him rightful King? Unjust, thou sayest, flatly unjust, to bind with laws the free, and equal over equals to let reign, one over all with unsucceeded power. Shalt thou give law to God? Shalt thou dispute with him the points of liberty, who made thee what thou art, and formed the powers of heaven, such as he pleased, and circumscribed their being? Yet by experience taught we know how good, and of our dignity, how provident he is, how far from thought to make us less, bent rather to exalt our happy state under one head more near united. But to grant it thee unjust, that equal over equals monarch reign, thyself, though great and glorious, dost thou count, or all angelic nature joined in one, equal to him begotten Son, by whom, as by his word, the mighty Father made all things, even thee, and all the spirits of heaven by him created in their bright degrees, crowned them with glory, and to their glory named thrones, dominations, princedoms, virtues, powers, essential powers, nor by his reign obscured, but more illustrious made, since he, the head one of our number, thus reduced becomes, his laws our laws, all honour to him done returns our own. Cease then this impious rage, and tempt not these, but hasten to appease the incensed Father and the incensed Son, while pardon may be found in time besought. So spake the fervent angel, but his zeal none seconded, as out of season judged, or singular and rash, whereat rejoiced the apostate, and more haughty thus replied: That we were formed, then, sayest thou, and the work of secondary hands, by task transferred from Father to his Son? Strange point, and new! Doctrine which we would know whence learnt. Who saw when this creation was? Rememberest thou thy making, while the Maker gave thee being? We know no time when we were not as now, know none before us, self-begot, self-raised by our own quickening power, when fatal course had circled his full orb, the birth mature of this our native heaven, ethereal sons. Our puissance is our own right hand shall teach us highest deeds, by proof to try who is our equal. Then thou shalt behold whether by supplication we intend address, and to begirt the almighty throne, beseeching or besieging. This report, these tidings carry to the anointed King, and fly, ere evil intercept thy flight. He said, and as the sound of waters deep, hoarse murmur echoed to his words applause through the infinite host, nor less for that the flaming seraph fearless, though alone encompassed round with foes, thus answered bold: O alienate from God, O spirit accursed, forsaken of all good! I see thy fall determined, and thy hapless crew involved in this perfidious fraud, contagion spread both of thy crime and punishment. Henceforth no more be troubled how to quit the yoke of God's Messiah. Those indulgent laws will not now be vouchsafed. Other decrees against thee are gone forth, without recall. That golden sceptre which thou didst reject is now an iron rod, to bruise and break thy disobedience. Well thou didst advise, yet not for thy advice or threats I fly, these wicked tents devoted, lest the wrath impendent, raging into sudden flame, distinguish not. For soon expect to feel his thunder on thy head, devouring fire. Then who created thee lamenting learn, when who can uncreate thee thou shalt know. So spake the seraph Abdiel, faithful found among the faithless, faithful only he, among innumerable false, unmoved, unshaken, unseduced, unterrified. His loyalty he kept, his love, his zeal. Nor numbers nor example with him wrought to swerve from truth or change his constant mind, though single. From amidst them forth he passed, long way through hostile scorn, which he sustained superior, nor of violence feared aught, and with retorted scorn his back he turned on those proud towers, to swift destruction doomed. End of Paradise Lost, Book 5, Part 2.
Book 6, Part 1. All night the dreadless angel unpursued through heaven's wide champaign held his way till morn, waked by the circling hours, with rosy hand unbarred the gates of light. There is a cave within the mount of God, fast by his throne, where light and darkness in perpetual round lodge and dislodge by turns, which makes through heaven grateful vicissitude like day and night. Light issues forth, and at the other door obsequious darkness enters, till her hour to veil the heaven, though darkness there might well seem twilight here. And now went forth the morn, such as in highest heaven, arrayed in gold imperial, from before her vanished night, shot through with orient beams. When all the plain covered with thick embattled squadrons bright, chariots and flaming arms, and fiery steeds reflecting blaze on blaze, first met his view. War he perceived, war in procinct, and found already known what he for news had thought to have reported. Gladly then he mixed among those friendly powers who him received with joy and acclamations loud, that one that of so many myriads fallen, yet one returned not lost. On to the sacred hill they led him high applauded, and present before the seat supreme, from whence a voice from midst a golden cloud thus mild was heard. Servant of God, well done, well hast thou fought the better fight, who single hast maintained against revolted multitudes the cause of truth, in word mightier than they in arms, and for the testimony of truth hast borne universal reproach far worse to bear than violence. For this was all thy care, to stand approved in sight of God, though worlds judge thee perverse. The easier conquest now remains thee, aided by this host of friends, back on thy foes more glorious to return than scorned thou didst depart, and to subdue by force who reason for their law refuse, right reason for their law and for their king, Messiah, who by right of merit reigns. Go, Michael, of celestial armies prince, and thou in military prowess next, Gabriel, lead forth to battle these my sons invincible, lead forth my armed saints, by thousands and by millions ranged for fight. Equal in number to that godless crew rebellious, them with fire and hostile arms fearless assault, and to the brow of heaven pursuing, drive them out from God and bliss, into their place of punishment, the gulf of Tartarus, which ready opens wide his fiery chaos to receive their fall. So spake the sovereign voice, and clouds began to darken all the hill, and smoke to roll in dusky wreaths, reluctant flames, the sign of wrath awaked. Nor with less dread the loud ethereal trumpet from on high 'gan blow, at which command the powers militant, that stood for heaven in mighty quadrate joined of union irresistible, moved on in silence their bright legions, to the sound of instrumental harmony that breathed heroic ardour to adventurous deeds, under their godlike leaders in the cause of God and his Messiah. On they move indissolubly firm, nor obvious hill nor straightening vale nor wood nor stream divides their perfect ranks, for high above the ground their march was, and the passive air upbore their nimble tread, as when the total kind of birds in orderly array on wing came summoned over Eden to receive their names of thee, so over many a tract of heaven they marched, and many a province wide, tenfold the length of this terrain. At last far in the horizon to the north appeared from skirt to skirt a fiery region, stretched, in battailous aspect and nearer view, bristled with upright beams innumerable of rigid spears, and helmets thronged, and shields various with boastful argument portrayed. the banded powers of Satan hasting on with furious expedition. For they weened that self-same day by fight or by surprise to win the mount of God, and on his throne to set the envier of his state, the proud aspirer, but their thoughts proved fond and vain in the midway, though strange to us it seemed at first that angel should with angel war, and in fierce hosting meet who wont to meet so oft in festivals of joy and love unanimous, as sons of one great sire hymning the eternal Father. But the shout of battle now began, and rushing sound of onset ended soon each milder thought. High in the midst, exalted as a god, th' apostate in his sun-bright chariot sate, idol of majesty divine, inclosed with flaming cherubim and golden shields. Then lighted from his gorgeous throne, for now 'twixt host and host but narrow space was left, a dreadful interval, and front to front presented stood in terrible array of hideous length. Before the cloudy van on the rough edge of battle ere it joined, Satan with vast and haughty strides advanced, came towering armed in adamant and gold. Abdiel that sight endured not, where he stood among the mightiest, bent on highest deeds, and thus his own undaunted heart explores. O Heaven! that such resemblance of the highest should yet remain where faith and reality remain not. Wherefore should not strength and might there fail where virtue fails, or weakest prove where boldest, though to sight unconquerable? His puissance trusting in the Almighty's aid I mean to try, whose reason I have tried, unsound and false. Nor is it aught but just that he who in debate of truth hath won should win in arms, in both disputes alike victor, though brutish that contest and foul. When reason hath to deal with force, yet so most reason is that reason overcome. So pondering, and from his armed peers forth stepping opposite, halfway he met his daring foe, at this prevention more incensed, and thus securely him defied. Proud art thou met? Thy hope was to have reached the height of thy aspiring unopposed, the throne of God unguarded, and his side abandoned at the terror of thy power or potent tongue. Fool, not to think how vain against th' Omnipotent to rise in arms, who out of smallest things could without end have raised incessant armies to defeat thy folly, or with solitary hand reaching beyond all limit, at one blow unaided could have finished thee and whelmed thy legions under darkness. But thou seest all are not of thy train. There be who faith prefer, and piety to God, though then to thee not visible, when I alone seemed in thy world erroneous to dissent from all. My sect thou seest, now learned too late how few sometimes may know, when thousands err. Whom the grand foe with scornful eye askance thus answered, Ill for thee, but in wished hour of my revenge first sought, for thou return'st from flight, seditious angel, to receive thy merited reward, the first essay of this right hand provoked, since first that tongue inspired with contradiction durst oppose a third part of the gods, in synod met, their deities to assert, who while they feel vigour divine within them can allow omnipotence to none. But well thou comest before thy fellows, ambitious to win from me some plume, that thy success may show destruction to the rest. This pause between, unanswered least thou boast, to let thee know, at first I thought that liberty and heaven to heavenly souls had been all one, but now I see that most through sloth had rather served. Ministering spirits trained up in feast and song, such hast thou armed the minstrelsy of heaven, servility with freedom to contend, as both their deeds compared this day shall prove. To whom in brief thus Abdiel stern replied, Apostate still thou errest, nor end will find of erring, from the path of truth remote. Unjustly thou deprav'st it with the name of servitude, to serve whom God ordains, or nature. God and nature bid the same, when he who rules is worthiest and excels them whom he governs. This is servitude, to serve the unwise, or him that hath rebelled against his worthier, as thine now serve thee, thyself not free, but to thyself enthralled, yet lewdly darest our ministering upbraid. Reign thou in hell thy kingdom, let me serve in heaven God ever blessed, and his divine behests obey, worthiest to be obeyed. Yet chains in hell, not realms expect. Meanwhile from me returned, as erst thou saidst, from flight, this greeting on thy impious crest receive. So saying, a noble stroke he lifted high, which hung not, but so swift with tempest fell on the proud crest of Satan, that no sight nor motion of swift thought less could his shield such ruin intercept. 10 paces huge he back recoiled, the 10th on bended knee his massy spear upstayed, as if on earth winds underground or waters forcing way sidelong had pushed a mountain from his seat, half sunk with all his pines. Amazement seized the rebel thrones, but greater rage to see thus foiled their mightiest. Ours joy filled, and shout, presage of victory and fierce desire of battle. Whereat Michael bid sound the archangel trumpet. Through the vast of heaven it sounded, and the faithful armies rung Hosanna to the highest. Nor stood at gaze the adverse legions, nor less hideous joined the horrid shock. Now storming fury rose, and clamour such as heard in heaven till now was never. Arms on armour clashing brayed horrible discord, and the madding wheels of brazen chariots raged. Dire was the noise of conflict. Overhead the dismal hiss of fiery darts in flaming volleys flew, and flying vaulted either host with fire. Sounder fiery cope together rushed both battles main, with ruinous assault and inextinguishable rage. All heaven resounded, and had earth been then, all earth had to her centre shook. What wonder, when millions of fierce encountering angels fought on either side, the least of whom could weld these elements and arm him with the force of all their regions? How much more of power army against army numberless to raise dreadful combustion warring, and disturb though not destroy their happy native seat? Had not the eternal King omnipotent from his strong hold of heaven high o'erruled and limited their might, though numbered such as each divided legion might have seemed a numerous host, in strength each armed hand a legion, led in fight, yet leader seemed each warrior single as in chief, expert when to advance or stand or turn the sway of battle, open when and when to close the ridges of grim war. No thought of flight, none of retreat, no unbecoming deed that argued fear. Each on himself relied, as only in his arm the moment lay of victory. Deeds of eternal fame were done, but infinite, for wide was spread that war and various, sometimes on firm ground a standing fight, then soaring on main wing tormented all the air. All air seemed then conflicting fire. Long time in even scale the battle hung, till Satan, who that day prodigious power had shown, and met in arms no equal, ranging through the dire attack of fighting seraphim confused, at length saw where the sword of Michael smote, and felled squadrons at once with huge two-handed sway, brandished aloft the horrid edge came down wide wasting, such destruction to withstand he hasted, and opposed the rocky orb of tenfold adamant, his ample shield of vast circumference. At his approach the great archangel from his warlike toil surceased, and glad as hoping here to end intestine war in heaven, the arch foe subdued or captive dragged in chains, with hostile frown and visage all inflamed first thus began: Author of evil, unknown till thy revolt, unnamed in heaven, now plenteous as thou seest these acts of hateful strife, hateful to all though heaviest by just measure on thyself and thy adherents, how hast thou disturbed heaven's blessed peace, and into nature brought misery uncreated till the crime of thy rebellion? How hast thou instilled thy malice into thousands, once upright and faithful, now proved false? But think not here to trouble holy rest. Heaven casts thee out from all her confines. Heaven, the seat of bliss, brooks not the works of violence and war. Hence, then, and evil go with thee along, thy offspring, to the place of evil, hell, thou and thy wicked crew. There mingle broils ere this avenging sword begin thy doom, or some more sudden vengeance winged from God precipitate thee with augmented pain. So spake the Prince of Angels, to whom thus the adversary: Nor think thou with wind of airy threats to all whom yet with deeds thou canst not. Hast thou turned the least of these to flight, or if to fall, but that they rise unvanquished, easier to transact with me than thou shouldst hope, imperious and with threats to chase me hence? Ere not that so shall end the strife which thou call'st evil, but we style the strife of glory, which we mean to win or turn this heaven itself into the hell thou fablest, here however to dwell free if not to reign, meanwhile thy utmost force, and join him named Almighty to thy aid. I fly not, but have sought thee far and nigh. They ended parley, and both addressed for fight unspeakable. For who, though with the tongue of angels, can relate, or to what things liken on earth conspicuous, that may lift human imagination to such height of godlike power? For likest gods they seemed, stood they or moved, in stature, motion, arms fit to decide the empire of great heaven. Now waved their fiery swords, and in the air made horrid circles. Two broad suns their shields blazed opposite, while expectation stood in horror. From each hand with speed retired where erst was thickest fight, the angelic throng, and left large field unsafe within the wind of such commotion, such as to set forth great things by small. If nature's concord broke, among the constellations war were sprung, two planets rushing from aspect malign of fiercest opposition in mid-sky should combat, and their jarring spheres confound. Together both with next to almighty arm uplifted imminent one stroke they aimed that might determine and not need repeat, as not of power at once, nor odds appeared in might or swift prevention. But the sword of Michael from the armoury of God was given him tempered so that neither keen nor solid might resist that edge. It met the sword of Satan with steep force to smite descending, and in half cut sheer, nor stayed, but with swift wheel reverse, deep entering shared all his right side. Then Satan first knew pain, and writhed him to and fro convolved, so sore the grinding sword with discontinuous wound passed through him. But th' ethereal substance closed not long divisible, and from the gash a stream of nectarous humour issuing flowed sanguine, such as celestial spirits may bleed, and all his armour stained erewhile so bright. Forthwith on all sides to his aid was run by angels many and strong, who interposed defence, while others bore him on their shields back to his chariot, where it stood retired from off the files of war. There they him laid, gnashing for anguish and despite and shame, to find himself not matchless, and his pride humbled by such a rebuke, so far beneath his confidence to equal God in power. Yet soon he healed, for spirits that live throughout vital in every part, not as frail man in entrails, heart or head, liver or rinds, cannot but by annihilating die, nor in their liquid texture mortal wound receive, no more than can the fluid air. All heart they live, all head, all eye, all ear, all intellect, all sense, and as they please they limn themselves, and colour, shape, or size, assume as likes them best, condense or rare. Meanwhile in other parts like deeds deserved memorial, where the might of Gabriel fought, and with fierce ensigns pierced the deep array of Moloch, furious king, who him defied, and at his chariot wheels to drag him bound threatened, nor from the Holy One of heaven refrained his tongue blasphemous, but anon down cloven to the waist, with shattered arms and uncouth pain fled bellowing. On each wing Uriel and Raphael his vaunting foe, though huge and in a rock of diamond armed, vanquished Adramelech and Asmodai, two potent thrones, that to be less than gods disdained, but meaner thoughts learned in their flight, mangled with ghastly wounds through plate and mail. Nor stood unmindful Abdiel to annoy the atheist crew, but with redoubled blow Ariel and Arioch, and the violence of Ramiel scorched and blasted overthrew. I might relate of thousands, and their names eternize here on earth, but those elect angels contented with their fame in heaven seek not the praise of men. The other soared in might though wondrous and in acts of war, nor of renown less eager, yet by doom cancelled from heaven and sacred memory, nameless in dark oblivion let them dwell. For strength from truth divided and from just, illaudable not merits but dispraise and ignominy, yet to glory aspires vainglorious, and through infamy seeks fame, therefore eternal silence be their doom. And now, their mightiest quelled, the battle swerved, with many an inroad gored, deformed rout entered, and foul disorder, all the ground with shivered armour strown, and on a heap chariot and charioteer lay overturned, and fiery foaming steeds, what stood recoiled or wearied, through the faint satanic host defensive scarce, or with pale fear surprised. Then first with fear surprised and sense of pain fled ignominious, to such evil brought by sin of disobedience, till that hour not liable to fear or flight or pain. Far otherwise the inviolable saints in cubic phalanx firm advanced entire, invulnerable, impenetrably armed, such high advantages their innocence gave them above their foes, not to have sinned, not to have disobeyed, in fight they stood unwearied, unobnoxious to be pained by wound, though from their place by violence moved. End of Book 6, Part 1.
Book 6, Part 2. Now night her course began, and over heaven, inducing darkness, grateful truce imposed, and silence on the odious din of war. Under her cloudy covert both retired, victor and vanquished. On the foughten field, Michael and his angels prevalent encamping, placed in guard their watches round, cherubic waving fires. On other part Satan with his rebellious disappeared, far in the dark dislodged, and void of rest, his potentates to council called by night, and in the midst thus undismayed began.
O now in danger tried, now known in arms not to be overpowered, companions dear, found worthy not of liberty alone, too mean pretense, but what we more affect, honor, dominion, glory, and renown, who have sustained one day in doubtful fight, and if one day, why not eternal days? What heaven's Lord had powerfulest to send against us from about his throne, and judged sufficient to subdue us to his will, but proves not so. Then fallible it seems of future we may deem him, though till now omniscient thought. True is, less firmly armed, some disadvantage we endured, and pain, till now not known, but known as soon contemned. Since now we find this our imperial form, incapable of mortal injury, imperishable, and though pierced with wounds soon closing, and by native vigor healed. Of evil then, so small as easy think the remedy, perhaps more valid arms, weapons more violent when next we meet, may serve to better us and worse our foes, or equal what between us made the odds in nature none. If other hidden cause left them superior, while we can preserve unhurt our minds and understanding sound, due search and consultation will disclose.
He sat, and in the assembly next up stood Nisroch of principalities the prime, as one he stood escaped from cruel fight, sore toiled, his riven arms to havoc hewn, and cloudy in aspect thus answering spake. Deliverer from new lords, leader to free enjoyment of our right as gods, yet hard for gods, and too unequal work we find, against unequal arms to fight in pain, against unpained impassive, from which evil ruin must needs ensue. For what avails valor or strength, though matchless, quelled with pain which all subdues, and makes remiss the hands of mightiest? Sense of pleasure we may well spare out of life perhaps, and not repine, but live content, which is the calmest life. But pain is perfect misery, the worst of evils, and excessive overturns all patience. He who therefore can invent with what more forcible we may offend our yet unwounded enemies, or arm ourselves with like defense, to me deserves no less than for deliverance what we owe. Whereto with look composed Satan replied, Not uninvented that which thou aright believ'st so main to our success I bring. Which of us who beholds the bright surface of this ethereous mould whereon we stand, this continent of spacious heaven, adorned with plant, fruit, flower ambrosial, gems and gold, whose eye so superficially surveys these things, as not to mind from whence they grow deep underground, materials dark and crude, of spirituous and fiery spume, till touched with heaven's ray and tempered, they shoot forth so beauteous, opening to the ambient light. These in their dark nativity the deep shall yield us, pregnant with infernal flame, which into hollow engines long and round, thick rammed, at th'other bore with touch of fire, dilated and infuriate, shall send forth from far with thundering noise among our foes, such implements of mischief as shall dash to pieces, and o'erwhelm whatever stands adverse, that they shall fear we have disarmed the thunderer of his only dreaded bolt. Nor long shall be our labor, yet ere dawn effect shall end our wish. Meanwhile revive, abandon fear. To strength and counsel joined, think nothing hard, much less to be despaired. He ended, and his words their drooping cheer enlightened, and their languished hope revived. The invention all admired, and each how he to be the inventor missed, so easy it seemed, once found, which yet unfound most would have thought impossible. Yet haply of thy race in future days, if malice should abound, some one intent on mischief, or inspired with devilish machination, might devise like instrument, to plague the sons of men for sin, on war and mutual slaughter bent. Forthwith from council to the work they flew, none arguing stood, innumerable hands were ready, in a moment up they turned wide the celestial soil, and saw beneath the originals of nature in their crude conception. Sulphurous and nitrous foam they found, they mingled, and with subtle art concocted and adjusted they reduced to blackest grain, and into store conveyed, part hidden veins digged up, nor hath this earth entrails unlike, of mineral and stone, whereof to found their engines and their balls of missive ruin. Part incentive reed provide, pernicious with one touch to fire. So all ere dayspring under conscious night secret they finished, and in order set, with silent circumspection unespied. Now when fair morn orient in heaven appeared, up rose the victor angels, and to arms the matin trumpet sung. In arms they stood of golden panoply, refulgent host, soon banded. Others from the dawning hills looked round, and scouts each coast light-armed scour, each quarter to descry the distant foe, where lodged, or whither fled, or if for fight, in motion or in alt. Him soon they met under spread ensigns moving nigh, in slow but firm battalion. Back with speediest sail Zephiel, of cherubim the swiftest wing, came flying, and in mid-air aloud thus cried, Arm, warriors, arm for fight! The foe at hand, whom fled we thought, will save us long pursuit this day. Fear not his flight. So thick a cloud he comes, and settled in his face I see sad resolution and secure. Let each his adamantine coat gird well, and each fit well his helm. Grip fast his orbed shield, borne even or high, for this day will pour down, if I conjecture aught, no drizzling shower, but rattling storm of arrows barbed with fire. So warned he them aware themselves, and soon in order quit of all impediment. Instant without disturb they took alarm, and onward move embattled, when behold, not distant far, with heavy pace the foe approaching, gross and huge, in hollow cube training his devilish enginery, impaled on every side with shadowing squadrons deep to hide the fraud. At interview both stood a while, but suddenly at head appeared Satan, and thus was heard commanding loud, Vanguard, to right and left the front unfold, that all may see who hate us, how we seek peace and composure, and with open breast stand ready to receive them, if they like our overture and turn not back perverse. But that I doubt, however witness heaven. Heaven, witness thou anon, while we discharge freely our part. Ye who appointed stand, do as you have in charge, and briefly touch what we propound, and loud that all may hear. So, scoffing in ambiguous words, he scarce had ended, when to right and left the front divided and to either flank retired, which to our eyes discovered new and strange, a triple-mounted row of pillars laid on wheels, for like to pillars most they seemed, or hollowed bodies made of oak or fir with branches lopped, in wood or mountain felled. Brass, iron, stony mould had not their mouths with hideous orifice gaped on us wide, portending hollow truce. At each behind a seraph stood, and in his hand a reed stood waving, tipped with fire, while we suspense, collected, stood within our thoughts amused. Not long, for sudden, all at once, their reeds put forth, and to a narrow vent applied with nicest touch. Immediate in a flame, but soon obscured with smoke, all heaven appeared from those deep-throated engines belched, whose roar emboweled with outrageous noise the air, and all her entrails tore, disgorging foul their devilish glut, chained thunderbolts and hail of iron globes, which on the victor host levelled, with such impetuous fury smote, that whom they hit, None on their feet might stand, though standing else as rocks, but down they fell by thousands. Angel on archangel rolled, the sooner for their arms. Unarmed they might have easily as spirits evaded swift by quick contraction or remove. But now foul dissipation followed, and forced rout. Nor served it to relax their serried files. What should they do? If on they rushed, repulse repeated, and indecent overthrow doubled, would render them yet more despised, and to their foes a laughter. For in view stood ranked of seraphim, another row in posture to displode their second tire of thunder. Back defeated to return, they worse abhorred. Satan beheld their plight, and to his mates thus in derision called, O friends, why come not on these victors proud, ere while they fierce were coming, and when we to entertain them fair with open front and breast, what could we more? Propounded terms of composition, straight they changed their minds, flew off, and into strange vagaries fell, as they would dance, yet for a dance they seemed somewhat extravagant and wild, perhaps for joy of offered peace. But I suppose if our proposals once again were heard, we should compel them to a quick result. To whom thus Belial in like gamesome mood, Leader, the terms we sent were terms of weight, of hard contents, and full of force urged home, such as we might perceive amused them all, and stumbled many who receives them right, had need from head to foot well understand. Not understood, this gift they have besides, they show us when our foes walk not upright. So they among themselves in pleasant vein stood scoffing, heightened in their thoughts beyond all doubt of victory, eternal might to match with their inventions they presumed so easy, and of his thunder made a scorn, and all his host derided while they stood a while in trouble. But they stood not long. Rage prompted them at length, and found them arms against such hellish mischief fit to oppose. Forthwith, behold the excellence, the power which God hath in his mighty angels placed. Their arms away they threw, and to the hills, for earth hath this variety from heaven, of pleasures situate in hill and dale. Light as the lightning glimpse they ran, they flew, from their foundations loosening to and fro, they plucked the seated hills with all their load, rocks, waters, woods, and by the shaggy tops uplifting, bore them in their hands. Amaze, be sure, and terror seized the rebel host, when coming towards them so dread they saw the bottom of the mountains upward turned, till on those cursed engines triple row they saw them whelmed, and all their confidence under the weight of mountains buried deep. Themselves invaded next, and on their heads main promontories flung, which in the air came shadowing, and oppressed whole legions armed. Their armor helped their harm, crushed in and bruised into their substance pent, which wrought them pain implacable, and many a dolorous groan, long struggling underneath, ere they could wind out of such prison, though spirits of purest light. Purest at first, now gross by sinning grown. The rest in imitation to like arms betook them, and the neighboring hills uptore. So hills amid the air encountered hills, hurled to and fro with jaculation dire, that underground they fought in dismal shade, infernal noise. War seemed a civil game to this uproar. Horrid confusion heaped upon confusion rose, and now all heaven had gone to rack, with ruin overspread, had not Almighty Father, where he sits shrined in his sanctuary of heaven secure, consulting on the sum of things, foreseen this tumult, and permitted all, advised, that his great purpose he might so fulfill, to honor his anointed Son avenged upon his enemies, and to declare all power on him transferred, whence to his Son, the assessor of his throne, he thus began. Effulgence of my glory, Son beloved, Son in whose face invisible is beheld visibly what by deity I am, and in whose hand what by decree I do, second omnipotence, 2 days are past, 2 days as we compute the days of heaven, since Michael and his powers went forth to tame these disobedient. Sore hath been their fight, as likeliest was when 2 such foes met armed. For to themselves I left them, and thou know'st, equal in their creation they were formed, save what sin hath impaired, which yet hath wrought insensibly, for I suspend their doom, whence in perpetual fight they needs must last endless, and no solution will be found. War wearied hath performed what war can do, and to disordered rage let loose the reins, with mountains as with weapons armed, which makes wild work in heaven, and dangerous to the main. 2 days are therefore past, the third is thine. For thee I have ordained it, and thus far have suffered, that the glory may be thine of ending this great war, since none but thou can end it. Into thee such virtue and grace immense I have transfused, that all may know in heaven and hell thy power above compare, and this perverse commotion governed thus, to manifest thee worthiest to be heir of all things, to be heir and to be king by sacred unction, thy deserved right. Go then, thou mightiest in thy Father's might, ascend my chariot, guide the rapid wheels that shake heaven's basis, bring forth all my war, my bow and thunder, my almighty arms gird on, and sword upon thy puissant thigh. Pursue these sons of darkness, drive them out from all heaven's bounds into the utter deep. There let them learn as likes them to despise God and Messiah his anointed King. He said, and on his Son with rays direct shone full, he all his Father full expressed ineffably into his face received, and thus the filial Godhead answering spake. O Father, O supreme of heavenly thrones, first, highest, holiest, best, thou always seek'st to glorify thy Son, I always thee as is most just. This I my glory account, my exaltation and my whole delight, that thou in me well pleased declarest thy will fulfilled, which to fulfill is all my bliss. Scepter and power thy giving I assume, and gladlier shall resign, when in the end thou shalt be all in all, and I in thee forever, and in me all whom thou lovest. But whom thou hatest, I hate, and can put on thy terrors as I put thy mildness on, image of thee in all things, and shall soon, armed with thy might, rid heaven of these rebelled, to their prepared ill mansion driven down to chains of darkness, and the undying worm that from thy just obedience could revolt, whom to obey is happiness entire. Then shall thy saints unmixed, and from them pure far separate, circling thy holy mount, unfeigned hallelujahs to thee sing, hymns of high praise, and I among them chief. So said, he o'er his scepter bowing rose from the right hand of glory where he sate, and the third sacred morn began to shine dawning through heaven. Forth rushed with whirlwind sound the chariot of paternal deity, flashing thick flames, wheel within wheel, undrawn, itself instinct with spirit, but convoyed by 4 cherubic shapes. 4 faces each had wondrous, as with stars their bodies all and wings were set with eyes the wheels of beryl, and careering fires between. Over their heads a crystal firmament, whereon a sapphire throne, inlaid with pure amber and colors of the showery arch. He in celestial panoply, all armed of radiant Urim, work divinely wrought, ascended. At his right hand Victory sate eagle-winged. Beside him hung his bow and quiver, with 3 bolted thunder stored. And from about him fierce effusion rolled of smoke, and bickering flame, and sparkles dire, attended with 10,000,000 saints. He onward came, far off his coming shone, and 20,000, I their number heard, chariots of God, half on each hand were seen, He on the wings of cherub rode sublime on the crystalline sky, in sapphire throned, illustrious far and wide, but by his own first seen. Then unexpected joy surprised when the great ensign of Messiah blazed aloft by angels borne, his sign in heaven, under whose conduct Michael soon reduced his army, circumfused on either wing, under their head embodied all in one. Before him power divine his way prepared. At his command the uprooted hills retired each to his place. They heard his voice and went obsequious. Heaven his wonted face renewed, and with fresh florets hill and valley smiled. This saw his hapless foes, but stood obdured, and to rebellious fight rallied their powers insensate, hope conceiving from despair. In heavenly spirits could such perverseness dwell? But to convince the proud, what signs avail, or wonders move the obdurate to relent? They hardened more by what might most reclaim, grieving to see his glory, at the sight took envy, and aspiring to his height, stood re-embattled fierce, by force or fraud weening to prosper, and at length prevail against God and Messiah, or to fall in universal ruin last, and now to final battle drew, disdaining flight or faint retreat, when the great Son of God to all his host on either hand thus spake: Stand still in bright array, ye saints, here stand ye angels armed, this day from battle rest. Faithful hath been your warfare, and of God accepted, fearless in his righteous cause, and as ye have received, so have ye done invincibly. But of this cursed crew the punishment to other hand belongs. Vengeance is his, or whose he sole appoints. Number to this day's work is not ordained, nor multitude. Stand only and behold God's indignation on these godless poured by me. Not you, but me they have despised, yet envied. Against me is all their rage, because the Father, to whom in heaven supreme kingdom and power and glory appertains, hath honored me according to his will. Therefore to me their doom he hath assigned, that they may have their wish, to try with me in battle which the stronger proves, they all, or I alone against them, since by strength they measure all, of other excellence not emulous, nor care who them excels, nor other strife with them do I vouchsafe. So spake the Son, and into terror changed his countenance, too severe to be beheld, and full of wrath bent on his enemies. At once the four spread out their starry wings, with dreadful shade contiguous, and the orbs of his fierce chariot rolled, as with the sound of torrent floods or of a numerous host. He on his impious foes right onward drove, gloomy as night. Under his burning wheels the steadfast empyrean shook throughout, all but the throne itself of God. Full soon among them he arrived, in his right hand grasping 10,000 thunders, which he sent before them, such as in their souls infixed plagues. They, astonished, all resistance lost, all courage. Down their idle weapons dropped. O'er shields and helmed heads he rode, of thrones and mighty seraphim prostrate, that wished the mountains now might be again thrown on them, as a shelter from his ire. Nor less on either side tempestuous fell his arrows, from the fourfold-visaged four distinct with eyes, and from the living wheels distinct alike with multitude of eyes. One spirit in them ruled, and every eye glared lightning, and shot forth pernicious fire among the accursed, that withered all their strength, and of their wonted vigor left them drained, exhausted, spiritless, afflicted, fallen. Yet half his strength he put not forth, but checked his thunder in mid-volley, for he meant not to destroy, but root them out of heaven. The overthrown he raised, and as a herd of goats or timorous flock together thronged, drove them before him thunderstruck. pursued with terrors and with furies to the bounds and crystal wall of heaven, which opening wide rolled inward, and a spacious gap disclosed into the wasteful deep. The monstrous sight strook them with horror backward, but far worse urged them behind. Headlong themselves they threw down from the verge of heaven, eternal wrath burnt after them to the bottomless pit. Hell heard the insufferable noise, hell saw heaven ruining from heaven, and would have fled affrighted, but strict fate had cast too deep her dark foundations, and too fast had bound. 9 days they fell, confounded chaos roared, and felt tenfold confusion in their fall through his wild anarchy, so huge a rout encumbered him with ruin. Hell at last yawning received them whole, and on them closed, hell their fit habitation, fraught with fire unquenchable, the house of woe and pain. Disburdened, heaven rejoiced, and soon repaired her mural breach, returning whence it rolled. Sole victor from the expulsion of his foes, Messiah his triumphal chariot turned. To meet him all his saints, who silent stood, eye-witness of his almighty acts, with jubilee advanced. And as they went, shaded with branching palm, each order bright sung triumph, and hymn sung victorious King, Son, Heir, and Lord, to him dominion given, worthiest to reign. He, celebrated, rode triumphant through mid-heaven, into the courts and temple of his mighty Father throned on high, who into glory him received, where now he sits at the right hand of bliss. Thus measuring things in heaven by things on earth at thy request, and that thou mayest beware by what is past, to thee I have revealed what might else to human race been hid, the discord which befell, and war in heaven among the angelic powers, and the deep fall of those too high aspiring, who rebelled with Satan, he who envies now thy state, who now is plotting how he may seduce thee also from obedience, that with him, bereaved of happiness, thou mayst partake his punishment, eternal misery, which would be all his solace and revenge, as a despite done against the Most High, thee once to gain companion of his woe. But listen not to his temptations, warn thy weaker. Let it profit thee to have heard by terrible example the reward of disobedience. Firm they might have stood, yet fell. Remember, and fear to transgress. End of Book 6, Part 2.